A bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn. These words by Helen Keller speak to the heart of change. Some love it, some absolutely hate it, but what's most important to know about change is it's something that's going to always happen. Change will always be there. Something is always growing. Someone is always shifting. You just can't deny it. Change will always be there. The road isn't ending for the Anxious Pastor podcast, but the road is bending, and that excites me so much. I want to follow it and see where it takes us. Today, we're talking about that bend in the road and why I hope you'll join me on this journey. So let's live real, let's be authentic, and let's get trying. Welcome to this episode of the Anxious Pastor podcast. I would like to say that, this is technically the last episode under the banner, the Anxious Pastor podcast. I know it's a sad day, but I'll give you more details on what's to come in just a minute. First, I wanted to thank all of you, each and every one of you who have listened, contributed, challenged me to see that this podcast is about community. It's about a journey. It's about growth and progress, not perfection. I love that. I love how you all have taken something that started with me being afraid and reminded me that it's not about me, but it's about us. Also, thank you for subscribing, for sharing and believing in me to help guide us along this journey. It's not easy, and I'm definitely not perfect, as you've clearly found out, and I don't have all the answers, again, as you found out. But I do love the challenge, and I do love the opportunity to work with each of you and just moving forward on this journey we're on. As I mentioned in the opening, the road isn't ending. The road is just bending. I grew up in the hollers of the Appalachian Mountains, so I'm used to the road turning and curving. And if you were traveling at night, you never knew what was around the bend. And this road we're on is the same. Who knows where it'll lead us, but my hope is that it'll be a place of freedom and a place to breathe. And, I think that is so important for us. And that's what we all want. We want to be able to have some peace in our lives. So as of today, this podcast will no longer be called the Anxious Pastor podcast, but will now be called Let's Get Tryin with Aaron Lee. Almost 1 year ago, I started this podcast, and literally as I was recording, the words "Let's Get Tryin" somehow made their way into the episode. I didn't script it. I didn't even really know what it meant. As the podcast evolved, though, and it grew, that line continued to stand out to me. It started to speak in new ways to me, speak volumes to me. And I don't say this as an opportunity to make myself look good, but my wife, Jerica, has always told me for years that one of the things she loves about me is that every day I try to be better than I was the day before. Now, some days I am moving forward, and some days I take about 50 steps back, and the next day I'm having to make up those 50 steps and then some. Let's Get Tryin. That's what it is. It's this drive. It's the importance of never giving up, but living a life that's rooted in vulnerability and authenticity. And that's how I try to live my life. And I promise you, I don't have it all together. I promise you, I sometimes struggle. But what excites me is that I believe that this is a huge part of our growth. It's a huge way for us to move forward as people, to grow in our relationship with Jesus, to grow in our relationships with one another, and to grow as a culture. We could be a movement if we become more authentic, more vulnerable, more real people. Now, I'm sure most of you know this by now, obviously by the name of the podcast, but I'm a pastor and my faith is the foundation of my life. So I can't make a decision without the direction of the Holy Spirit. He guides and he leads me, he challenges me. And this has been a real wrestle for me because I have a fear of failure. So whenever failure comes into play, I tend to ignore anything but the possibility of bad things happening. I also have this fear that anything I do will focus on me or not be successful by worldly standards. But that's not the right focus. The focus needs to be that this change, this shift will bring new life and an opportunity for real honesty. And that's something that the world is missing. I don't know if you feel that way, but look around. The world is living in hate and lies and deceit. I really believe that the world doesn't want us to be authentic. I believe that living in authenticity isn't a popular place to be. One of my all-time favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Gethsemane. This passage has spoke to me in so many ways, so many different ways. And to fully understand why I wanted to change the name of the podcast, we need to read this together. If you've heard it before, go with me on this. To give some context, though, this story is found in Matthew 26, and Jesus is aware that he will soon be crucified. He's going to be betrayed by one of his disciples, so he goes to pray, and he takes his disciples with him. And so this is, again, in Matthew 26, starts in verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed, and he told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and watch with me." He went on a little further and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." And then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me for even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Then Jesus left them for a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." And then he returned to them again and found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. So he went to pray a third time, saying the same things. And then he came to his disciples and said, "Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. But look, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let us be going. Look, my betrayer is here." So hang with me. I want us to break this down so that you can fully understand what I truly mean by let's get trying. For us to live this idea out, we have to follow Jesus's model here. Whether you believe in Jesus or not, it still applies. You can apply these things to your life. The first one is Jesus was real and authentic. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." And see, Jesus' example of being real and authentic has always blown my mind. I mean, he's God in flesh, yet he's struggling with what he must do. And he comes right out and says it. He says, "I'm crushed with grief." As the leader of his disciples, he isn't acting like he has it all together. He's laying it out for them how overwhelmed he truly is. Jesus is being real. Then Jesus says, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." This is the definition of live real, be authentic. He says, "Please take this away from me. My soul is crushed." That's real. That's him living real. But then he says, "Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Now that's authentic. And the difference is he's being real by sharing how he feels. He's being authentic because of who he is and what he believes in. His internal values are in line with his external declaration. I think that's worth saying again. His internal values are in line with his external declaration. That's how you live authentically. The second way, Jesus was honest and challenging. In verse 40, it says, "Then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, 'Couldn't you watch with me even for 1 hour? Keep watch and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak.'" Imagine you're grieving and you ask your friends to sit with you, but they fall asleep. How would you feel? You'd probably be hurt. I imagine that that's how Jesus felt. This is where he doesn't hold in his hurt, but he's honest. He's real, and he challenges them out of it. If we are to live out of that phrase, let's get trying, then we have to be willing to be honest and challenge and allow others to challenge us. We need to hear those things. We need that challenge in our lives. The third model that Jesus shows us is he was bold and he was on mission. And I love this part. It says in verse 46, "Up, let us be going. Look, my betrayer is here." Another translation says, "Rise, let us go." Kind of sounds like the phrase, "let's get trying," doesn't it? The connection is that Jesus wasn't running from what was in front of him. He was embracing it. He went to his betrayer. That's what "let's get trying" will be all about. Whether it's anxiety, leadership, marriage, parenting, work, or whatever, the goal is that we stand in front of whatever, ready to do what must be done. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing I love about Jesus. Jesus knew the end game. He knew that he needed to face his accusers to be able to fully be on mission. His mission was to save the world and restore the broken relationship between God and man. That's the model of why I believe it's important to change the title of this podcast to "Let's Get Trying." It gives us the opportunity to address any area in our lives where we need to be real and authentic. Now, many of you may be asking, isn't this an anxiety podcast? Well, the answer is both yes and no. Anxiety has been the medium that's brought us together. But if you haven't noticed, we talk about a lot of topics and how anxiety relates to them. That will never change about this podcast. While this podcast may not be characterized as an anxiety podcast, it'll always address how anxiety can affect and impact our lives. Another way I want us to look at it is that this is actually allowing us the opportunity to stop focusing on just anxiety and now address the specific things that cause us anxiety. For me, recently, I've been feeling this pressure, this anxiety of raising my boys to be godly men. Now, rather than addressing my anxiety, I'm now able to address the source of my anxiety and that feeling of inadequacy, frustration, worry. All that comes from my wounds. And those wounds can either help me know how to teach my boys, or it can prevent me from teaching my boys. Does that make sense? It's not focusing on the anxiety. It's focusing on the thing that keeps me from it and how to move forward. If you hear one thing in this episode, I hope you hear this. 1, be real and live authentic. True authenticity is actually the greatest medicine to fight against the enemy of our minds. I want to say that one more time. True authenticity is actually the greatest medicine to fight against the enemy of our minds. Listen to this quote by Brené Brown. "If you trade your authenticity for safety, you may experience the following: anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addiction, rage, blame, resentment, and inexplicable grief." I think what she's saying is that if we continue to be afraid to move forward, to look past our anxiety, then we're going to find ourselves right back where we started, fighting the anxiety, fighting the depression, fighting eating disorders, etc. We can't choose what's comfortable over what's required, and that's authenticity. Authenticity will surprisingly start to shift our lives. In a social psychology article from iResearchNet.com, we find this being proven. It says, researchers have found that authentic functioning relates to higher and more secure self-esteem, less depression, and healthier interpersonal relationships. Bottom line, if we really want to fight our anxiety and depression, then let's be authentic. That's what they're saying. Now, as always, some of us deal with these issues because of unbalanced brain chemistry, and that requires us to use medication to help level us out. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's worth each of us seeing a doctor to find out how to get better with this and to how to balance out our lives. The side I'm talking about is how we've wired our brains to think, and we can untangle that mess by living real and being authentic. So how do we do this? We do it by talking about topics that each of us deal with on a daily basis. Some of the upcoming topics that I'm looking for us to spend some time on are topics like how to have an authentic friendship, why we need to slow down, why people hate politicians. That one's going to be fun. The art of listening, having a bad day, and how to rebound. Now, these are just a few of the topics. And I believe the answer to each one of them is actually to live real and be authentic. Now, it's going to require us to talk and talk practically about how to do that. But I still believe it's about living real and being authentic. Another way I believe we can do this is through social community. I have some big dreams for this. But starting out, we've got to start talking. We got to start talking. I've asked this before, and I would love for you guys to join into the conversation. I don't want it to just be me talking. It's about all of us. We're on this journey together. Our insecurities, our pride will do their best to keep us from doing that. But if we have an awareness of that, then maybe it'll help us be more real and more vulnerable, and we can have these true discussions and start changing the world in this new way of living real and being authentic. That's how we live out this line, let's get trying. All right, so what are the details? How is everything changing under this new banner? Well, I'm glad you asked. I could hear you through your car stereo. Well, as I mentioned, the podcast is now called Let's Get Tryin with Aaron Lee. Today's episode will start a short break where we won't have any episodes, but on August 12th, that's a Wednesday, we'll begin the next chapter, the bend in our podcasting journey. I'll continue the same format of a solo podcast with interviews every now and then. I hope to add more interviews as time goes on. I mean, honestly, who wants to listen to me? I'm just hoping that we can bring more people that can bring more insight to this mindset, and it'd just be a beautiful thing. I'm also hoping to create a few interactive segments within the episode that allows our audience to participate. Again, I want community, not a bunch of spectators. Also, for those of you who have been a part of the Anxious Pastor community group on Facebook, we'll be rebranding that group as Let's Get Tryin with Anxiety. If you aren't a part of that group, please jump in. I would love for that community to become more active. It's kind of been a dry wasteland lately, and I would love for that group to be more active in discussions and things like that. So be sure to jump onto that if you haven't yet, and then we can just work on that anxiety piece together through that Facebook group. I'm hoping that other groups will pop up as time goes on in different specific areas, but for now, just that group will be called Let's Get Tryin with Anxiety. Now, if you're jumping onto that group, be sure to answer the questions so that I know that you're a real person, because you would not believe that there are some robots out there trying to get into that group. Anyway, finally, I would love for you all to check out the website. The website is new and redesigned as of today. You can still go to it by means of theanxiouspastor.com, but you can also reach it by aaronteely.com or letsgettryin.com. All those website addresses will take you to this new website, and I'm so pumped about it. It is awesome. All right, let me check my list. I feel like I've covered everything. Yes. I'm sorry I've bombarded you with information. I hope that you're as excited about the future as I am. I ask that you don't give up on me yet. There's still tons of work to be done, and I want us to journey this together. We need one another. So let's go. I mean, remember, this is about being real. It's about living real and being authentic, and we don't want to brush this off as unimportant. It's the foundation of a beautiful life. I want to end with this quote by Brené Brown. Yes, I did quote her earlier, but she has some great stuff on this topic. Listen to this quote. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It is the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path. I love this. This is the calling that's ahead of us. I'm so excited about greater clarity and purpose. A life that's free of the masquerade of bondage. Don't you want that freedom too? So come on, join me on this journey ahead. It's not going to be easy, but I believe in it so much. As we close out today, I thought it would be really cool for you to hear the new opening intro music for Let's Get Tryin with Aaron Lee. So as we head out, it's going to require us to live real and be authentic. So let's get trying.
Let's Get Tryin is a podcast that challenges us to live real and authentic lives, no matter the journey we're on, from life to faith to even mental health. Host Aaron Lee presents the importance of never giving up. So let's get Tryin with Aaron Lee.